I'm done by 12:15, so you've got oceans of time.
Very good. Thank you, Pastor.
God bless you, brother.
Hopefully I'm not too close to that microphone. Good morning. It is good to be with you. We're going to talk about God's providence in the American Revolution. This is the beginning of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolutionary War. We've already passed the 250th anniversary of the first battle at Lexington and Concord. That was in April of this year. And then during this year, you're going to hear about different events, and there are certain commemorations being taken place in some of these battle sites. I have been a student of American history since I was a youngster. Davy Crockett was introduced to me by Walt Disney when I was 6 years old. If you're my age, you remember the craze that happened. Every boy my age had a coonskin cap before the year was over, and a flintlock rifle, knew how to Indian wrestle, and some of those kind of things. And the motto was, be sure you're right, and then go ahead. That was piqued my interest in American history in particular. And I have enjoyed studying and reading books about the American Revolutionary War. One of the things that stood out recently in I just reread two books, was really about providence, God's providence. Now, we don't really hear the word providence. Go ahead to the next slide, if you would. We don't hear about providence too often, but providence refers to God's continuing involvement in all His created things, guiding them toward His ultimate purpose. It has to do with His foresight, care, and governance over the universe. The concept of providence is rooted in the belief that God is sovereign and actively sustaining and directing all aspects of life. So that's a good definition. God's care of His universe. All things exist by Him and for Him. So God is sovereign. God is ruling the earth. And though there is rebellion from Satan and from us as men and who are sinners, God's still overriding, and God cares for His world. Now go to the next slide. Good. God's providence is categorized in three aspects: preservation, concurrence, and governance. Preservation refers to God's sustaining power, maintaining the existence of all things. You would not exist, I would not exist, except God sustains us. God keeps us going. Secondly, concurrence involves God's cooperation with created things, allowing them to act according to their nature while fulfilling His divine purposes. So God created all things He made. He allows them to act according to their nature. So that's how nature works. God continually cares for that. And then governance is what we're thinking about today. God denotes God's sovereign rule, directing all events to achieve His ultimate plan. So God has a plan for eternity, and He is working that out. Go ahead to the next slide. You see a reference to this. You read it in your scripture reading. This is from Daniel chapter 2, when the king had a great dream and saw that vision, remember, of the image, head of gold, arms of silver, trunk of brass, legs iron, feet iron mixed with clay. He did not know what it meant. And so he ordered the wise men to come, to his counselors to come. He'd tell them the dream, tell them the interpretation. They couldn't do it. Nebuchadnezzar gave orders that all the wise men should be killed, which shows you how foolish he was. But word came to Daniel and his three friends. They were believers in God. Daniel said, hold on, let me pray. There's a God who reveals secrets. And God did reveal the secret to him in the story of that. And he made this statement. And Daniel answered and said, blessed is the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are His. He changes the time and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. Now that's the phrase that we're going to pick up on the American Revolutionary War. That's God's governance, His providence in the Revolutionary War that assured America to have the victory. Go ahead to the next slide. We're going to have to move along, guys. The Boston Tea Party really touched off, I suppose, the American Revolution. You could go back to the Boston Massacre that happened before that. England had joined with the colonies in the French and Indian War. They had accumulated a great debt, and they wanted America to pay for it, the colonies to help pay for it. The colonies objected, particularly to a tea tag, a tax on tea. There were the Stamp Act as well, there were other things they objected to. And remember, they decided one night to dress up like Indians, hit the ship and dump the tea overboard, the Boston Tea Party. But the next slide, go ahead to the next slide. The result of that, King George was ticked off, to say the least. So he sent troops to occupy, 4,000 troops to occupy Boston. He suspended their local law and instituted martial law. He blockaded their harbor. He basically took over. America was in trouble. Boston was in trouble in particular. Go to the next slide. As a result of that, you go to the next one. Whoops. I will go to the next slide. There we go. Some of the time this works and some of the time it doesn't, guys. As a result of that, the colonies decided they needed to do something. How do we respond to this? So they called for a Continental Congress. This is the first Continental Congress. I mentioned in Sunday school one of the things they did. They did not agree on how to react to England. They were not sure, but they did know how to react to the cross. They knelt at the cross. And they prayed and asked God. Now, they had no thoughts of being an independent country at that point, for the most part. They were just, how do we react to the siege in Boston? But they began with prayer, seeking God's wisdom, and God didn't give wisdom. Go ahead to the next slide. The king, part of what they did in that First Continental Congress is they sent word to petition listing their grievances to the king, hoping for a peaceful resolution. It did not happen. Instead, the king and parliament passed what are called the Intolerable Acts, a whole bunch of things that were a problem. So go ahead to the next slide. While occupying Boston, the British general heard that there was an armament at Concord. He decided that he would send his troops up to Concord, confiscate the weapons and the ammunition. Dr. Warren got wind of it and dispatched Paul Revere and William Dawes to warn the people in Lexington and Concord that they were coming. The arms were eventually healed. You can see the route that they took up to Concord. Go ahead to the next slide. We'll keep moving. That's Dr. Warren. One more slide. The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere was made famous by Longfellow. Actually, there were two men that were dispatched. They did not say the British are coming because they all considered themselves British. They might have said the lobsterbacks are coming. They may have said the redcoats are coming. They may have said the troops are coming, but they would not have said the British are coming. They considered themselves British. But warning did get out. Paul Revere was actually captured before he got to Concord, but William Dawes actually made a completed ride. So in many ways, Dawes is kind of a forgotten man in history and should have been a hero. Go ahead to the next slide. The battle took place in Lexington. It was actually the members of one local church. Sam Adams and John Hancock were staying at the pastor's home that night. They had been the leaders in the government in Boston and were out of the city because of the British were looking for them. In fact, part of the goal of sending the troops was they had heard that they were staying in Lexington, and the British wanted to capture these two men. If they captured them, they thought the war would be pretty much over. They were the hot brand. Sam Adams in particular was a hot brand of the American Revolutionary War. So the pastor was asked by one of the two men, "Will your men fight?" And he said, "I have trained them for this very hour." So the next day, it was members of one local church that met on Lexington Green and met the British troops. No one knows for sure who shot the shot heard around the world. Some say it was American, some say it was British. Nobody knows for sure. But a shot was fired, a volley was exchanged. The Americans were vastly outnumbered and fled the field, but warning had been given. War really has begun now between America and England. Go to the next slide. At Concord, the men met at the North Bridge, stopping the British advance. The British soldiers were somewhat bewildered. Men came from all over the countryside and started sniping at the British as they marched back to Boston. It was really a one-sided thing. Go ahead to the next slide. This is Sam Adams and John Hancock. Part of the goal, as I said, was to capture these two men. Providence intervened, and these men were able to continue to live in freedom. Go ahead to the next slide. The unknown part of history of this is a month before, Governor Jonathan Turnbull of neighboring Connecticut had called for a statewide day of prayer. This was very common from the time of the Pilgrims all the way up through the American Revolution, where governors would call for a day of prayer. That date he selected for the day of prayer happened to be the very same day of the battle at Lexington. Again, God's providence is working in our world. Second Continental Congress met after that and convened summer of 1775 to develop a strategy. One of the things they did is they appointed General Washington to be their commander-in-chief of the army. They actually authorized the establishment of an army. We didn't have one before that. We had militia. They sent what was called the olive branch to the king, again seeking a peaceful resolution to the conflict. That was rebuffed. Congress began to act like a government. They published money. They established the army. They started foreign relations, sending ambassadors to various countries, and developing intelligence, and then, of course, organizing that army that would be there. Go ahead to the next slide. Washington was appointed. He was a Virginian. They thought that was the most important, probably the most experienced. He'd been a colonel in the militia, Virginia militia, during the French and Indian War. His life had been spared several times. We don't have time to go into that, but again, the providence of God caring for it and the selection of this man. Probably nobody else in America could have led the American army and kept them together except General Washington. Go ahead. On July 4th, as you know, the Declaration of Independence was issued. They actually voted in June to become an independent country. They decided that if they were going to do that, they should explain to the world why they were doing it, not only to the world, but to the American colonists. And so they wrote this document. Thomas Jefferson was assigned to be the main writer. The Committee of Five wrote it. Jefferson wrote it. The committee revised it. It went to Congress. They revised it. And by the time they got all done, they actually voted on it on July the 2nd. John Adams thought that would be the day that we would celebrate Independence Day, but when the document was actually written and printed, they dated it July 4, 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and have been endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They went on to say that when a governments are established to secure these rights, but when a government goes against those rights, it is the right of the people to abolish that government and select a government of their own choosing. Congress acted on behalf. This was not really a revolution in a sense. They were acting in accordance with the charters they had been given by Great Britain. Their rights had been violated. England was no longer serving them or in their interest, and so they felt they had the right to become an independent country. We'll say more about it later. Well, at the very end, I guess I put this. And for the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. Now, when they said that, they meant it. Today, most people think that the founders were deists. They were not. Deists believe God created the world and just stands back and lets it go. These were men that were counting on God taking care. They counted on the providence of God. They said so right in the pledge. Firm reliance on the providence of God. Now, the reason they had that is they had no chance of winning. They understood by signing that document. Someone said to Adams, we must hang together. And Franklin said, we must surely hang together or we will all hang separately. That was the consequence of rebelling against England. They would have been put to death and been captured. And many of the founders who signed the document did pay a very high price. Some lost their property, some lost their families, some lost their lives in the cause of freedom. They pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. We certainly should remember their sacred honor, but it was providence of God that they were counting on to get them through. Go ahead to the next slide. The Battle of Long Island was the first battle, major battle after the Declaration of Independence. Washington, having relieved the siege of Boston, and that's another story for another time, moved his troops up to New York because it was believed that the British troops would invade the major harbor of the United States, or the colonies, which was New York. And indeed that was the case. Britain sent 30,000 troops to Long Island to take control. Go into the next slide, if you would. This shows what happened. There's a lot of skirmishes. The British landed over here and then began marching up and around, and you can see the battles. And there are various battles that were fought all around here. The British Navy, no, I'm not getting that thing. There it is. British Navy were coming up this way. Now, it becomes very significant because the Americans end up getting backed up. They're right up here. This is the East River. So they're backed right up. The backs are right against the wall. Washington has 8,000 troops. They had that many volunteers. Most of them are in 6-month enlistments. So what do? He knew if he stood and fought, he'd surely be defeated. The war would be over. That'd be it. Surrender was not an option because, again, the war would be over. So what do? Well, he had an ingenious plan. He said, we will go across the East River. So he commanded every boat, ship, sailboat that they could find to be gathered, and they would cross that night, beginning at 11 o'clock when night fell. But what Washington didn't know is the British were planning on coming up and blocking his escape path just by putting their ships up here. But a storm came up that day with high winds, and the British were not able to move their fleet. At 11 o'clock, when they were to cross the East River, the wind stopped, the storm stopped, and they were able to get across. They traveled across all night with boats going back and forth across the river. But at the end of the day, they were still, when the sun came up, go ahead to the next slide, there were still people there. We're going to go ahead to the next slide. Go ahead. One more. I'm going to have to cut out those slides when I do this again. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. They used rafts and everything else they could. They set up fires so the British would think they were still there. A skeleton crew was left. When the last boats were to go across, a fog came up. Here's what Major Talmadge said. As the dawn of the next day approached, those of us who remained on the trenches became very anxious for our own safety. At this time, a very dense fog began to rise and seemed to settle in a particular manner over both encampments. I recollect that this peculiar providential occurrence perfectly well, and so very dense was the atmosphere that I could scarcely discern a man at 6 yards distance. God brought a fog, so the British couldn't see them escaping. When the British attacked that morning, they found the American camps empty, and they saw the last ship as the fog began to lift. Last boat going across. God had spared the American army. Go ahead to the next slide. There are a lot of other battles that we could look at. We don't have time to do that, obviously, for the whole war, but the next major victory was the Battle of Trenton. Now, this would go ahead to the next slide. This is the crossing of the Delaware story. Washington was in New Jersey. He was going to attack, or was in Pennsylvania. He was going to cross the Delaware that night. What he decided was the Hessians, who were encamped in Trenton, were known for drinking. And they were also known for celebrating on Christmas Day in particular. So he decided he would attack the morning of the 26th. He would cross on Christmas night with his troops, and he would attack that morning. Go ahead to the next slide. As the American troops began the trip across the Delaware, a violent snow and hailstorm erupted, making it even more dangerous. But that worked to the advantage of the Americans because they couldn't be seen, covered them up. They were able to cross. They completely surprised the Hessians by attacking that morning. Almost no casualties on the American side. Go ahead to the next slide. But over 1,000 Hessians were forced to surrender. This was a decisive victory in a lot of ways. Go ahead to the next slide if you would. Because the American morale was real low. They've been losing one battle after another. And enlistments were running out. 6-month enlistments had run out. There were deserters as well. This victory caused the Americans to be encouraged again, renew their enlistments, and others joined the battle. So it was a victory. Go ahead to the next slide. Battle of Trenton. General Knox, Henry Knox, who ended up being, he had been a bookstore or librarian. He became a general. He was the only one that knew much about cannons. He knew about it because he read about it. Anyway, he made this comment, Providence seemed to smile on every part of this enterprise. So again, credit was given to God. Go ahead to the next slide. The Battle of Saratoga happened in New York, and that was a turning point in the war. Ward North, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, came up with a brilliant plan. He would have the 30,000 troops of General Howe in New York come up the Hudson River. He would have General Burgoyne come from Quebec down the chain of lakes and things. They would meet at Saratoga, and he had Colonel St. Ledger gather Indian allies along the way, attacking Fort Stanwix, which is in Rome, blocking them from reinforcing or assisting the other Americans. The plan was really brilliant, except for one thing. In his haste to go on a vacation, he forgot to sign the orders for General Howe. So General Howe and his 30,000 troops stayed in New York City, did not come. The Americans stopped the Indians and Colonel Ledger at Fort Stanwix. General Herkimer, when you go by the town of Herkimer, that is named after him. They were able to stop the Indians and their allies, and then the colonists from all the militia from New England, from New York, all gathered. You know who the hero was at the Battle of Saratoga? Anybody know?
Benedict Arnold.
It was Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold lost his foot or leg, bottom part of from his knee down at Saratoga, and you can go to the graveside of his foot at Saratoga, but they don't put his name on it. It's just there's a picture of his leg, and it's buried there, but they don't name the soldier because of the disgrace of the name associated with it. Washington had been specifically praying for a change in Providence during this time, so it's interesting that had happened. Go ahead to the next slide. I didn't mention Brandywine was a disaster for the Americans. Go ahead to the next slide. Go ahead to the next slide. 5,000 troops had to surrender. British troops had to surrender. Now, what do you think they did with 5,000 troops? Well, they marched into Boston, put them on ships, and sent them back to England, having taken a pledge that they would not return and fight against the Americans. War was a little different back then, huh? They did things a little bit differently. Go ahead to the next slide. Tremendous victory. Because of the victory, first of all, the Americans were greatly encouraged. Maybe we could win this thing. And then secondly, Benjamin Franklin was our ambassador to France, was able to convince France to enter the war. So now the war becomes global. We have the French Navy and French Army to help, and Britain now has to fight on more than one front. So it was a major victory. It's certainly a turning point in the war. Go ahead to the next slide. That was since fall of 1777. Following the victory, this is what Congress did. They called for a national day of Thanksgiving to be celebrated on Thursday, December 18th. They proclaimed the holidays so that with one heart and one voice the good people may express the grateful feelings of their hearts and consecrate themselves to the service of their divine benefactor. That actually is the first national Thanksgiving, because America had declared its independence, so it's a nation now, and this is the first declaration of a Thanksgiving day, a day to give thanks for God's providence in giving us the victory. So it was a great, great day. Go ahead to the next slide. Valley Forge, of course, was a tough experience. American troops settled for the winter of 1777-78 at Valley Forge. Congress was not prompt in sending them food and supplies. Troops were starving. They didn't have proper clothing. Many of them didn't have boots or shoes, so their feet were frostbitten. It was a tough experience. A farmer was the one who recorded seeing General Washington in the woods, kneeling by his horse, praying. And he said, "I knew at that moment America would win this war because of the prayers of that man." God answered those prayers, certainly. And a good thing that happened during that time is General Baron von Steuben, who's kind of a mysterious figure. Some don't question whether he was actually a baron or anything, but he had military background, and he came to Valley Forge and began training the troops on how to march in formation, how to move, military moves and things of that nature, and really helped develop the American Army so that it became a fighting force instead of just more or less militia that were fighting. Go ahead to the next slide. Betrayal of Benedict Arnold is one of the black marks in American history. Arnold felt that he had not been treated well after his victory at Saratoga. General Gates got the credit, even though he didn't deserve it. He was assigned to be in charge of Philadelphia for a time, was accused of corruption. He was denied promotion. He became involved with a woman, in fact married her, that was a Tory. She convinced him that he would be better off to side with the British. Communications were made with the British authorities. He agreed to, he had been put in charge of West Point, which was a strategic fort on the Hudson. So he agreed to betray. Now, through kind of a providential thing, the plot was discovered. 3 soldiers stopped British Major Andre. Realized he had papers on him indicating the plot. Did not reveal who the traitor was. So the 3 soldiers took Andre back to West Point, turned him over to Benedict Arnold. Arnold, realizing that the plot was discovered and he would be arrested, fled for his life, leaving his wife behind. The plot not only involved betraying West Point or turning West Point over to the British, it also included killing or capturing General Washington. Had Washington been captured and the plot succeeded, Washington would have been captured or killed, and that probably would have seriously helped with the rest of the war. Thankfully, the plot was discovered. Today, we think of Benedict Arnold. When you hear that name, you think traitor. So his name is always going to live in infamy. Go ahead to the next slide. I should have mentioned Washington credited the providence of God in revealing the plot. The Battle of Copens is the one that's shown on The Patriot. Remember the movie The Patriot? And that is basically the Battle of Copens. General Daniel Morgan and his troops came up with this plan. The militia would meet the British who were pursuing after them. General Cornwallis had been pursuing the American Army for some time. He complained again and again that he would almost be ready to catch them, and a storm would come up, rivers would be flooded. He wasn't able to do it. He was angry. Other British generals complained as well about it seems as though God is against us. And I think he was. So it's an interesting thing. But the plan was very simple. The main army would stay behind the hill. The militia would fire a volley, then retreat. The British would think that they had won and would charge. When they got over the hill, they'd meet the whole American army. And that's basically what happened in the Battle of Cowpens. It became a very important battle. Cornwallis then, having lost the battle, heads toward Yorktown. And that becomes the final battle. Go to the next slide. At Yorktown, the British are expected to be evacuated by the British Navy. However, the French fleet showed up and blockaded the James River, so he couldn't get over. He sent half of his troops across, but storm came up. He wasn't able to send the rest, so he had half here and half here, completely surrounded by the Americans and French, and was forced to surrender. September 28th to October 1781, the war is over. Now the key to the victory was faith in God's providence. Throughout the war, governors, Congress, and others, generals, called for days of prayer. Can you imagine a general today saying to his troops, all right, I want you to spend tomorrow in prayer or divine worship? Just an amazing thing to think about. And those prayers were answered. God delivered America. When you look at the American Revolutionary War, England had just won the French and Indian War. It was also a national war as well. They had the world's greatest army. They had the world's greatest navy. We had merchant marines. We had militia. We had a few ships, but they were commercial ships. We had absolutely no chance of winning. Couldn't possibly be won. How did we win? Well, it was the faith in the providence of God. God taking care of his people. I believe with all my heart that God has a plan for America. I'm very thankful to be an American. I hope you are as well.
Yes.
When we sing some of the songs, we say, God shed his grace on thee.
Yes.
God has blessed America. We're like no nation ever in the history of the world. But our freedom could be lost. Ronald Reagan said, if we ever forget we're one nation under God, we'll become a nation gone under. I believe that. America is beautiful.
Yes.
What a country we live in. Aren't you glad to be an American?
Yes. Amen.
Now, people come from all over the world to live here. I don't blame them. I'm thankful my parents, I was born here, my parents were born here, my grandparents were born here. My great-grandparents, they were immigrants, some of them. But I'm glad they came to America. God's providence. God cares for his people. God watches over his people. We can trust him with our future. Now, Father, we thank you for the providence of God. We thank you for the way you acted during that